All right, welcome back to the Deep Life. Today we have a really interesting guest that I am definitely looking forward to speaking with and diving deep with. Dave Richards has spent his career working in education as a teacher, a principal, a superintendent. He's been a board member, and more importantly, for the last 25 years, he's worked in education reform, where he started 10 award-winning schools, which I think is amazing. I think we're at a place in the world right now, and we'll get into this, where we need education reform and we need to be kind of taught and learn in a new way.
I agree.
And Dave Richards is the guy to talk to about this. So Dave, welcome to the Deep Life.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. You can probably tell the introduction. I'm excited about this. But let's start out with a little bit of your background and kind of figure out what kind of person kind of leads this revolution in education.
Well, I always like to just describe myself as a banker turned educator turned entrepreneur. I think that's like an
Okay.
easy way to frame it. So
Okay, gotcha.
I actually started in banking in my 20s, and I was working in Washington, D.C. I was 29 years old. I had the three-piece suit. I was 2 blocks from the White House. I was at this bank that every president in the United States had a bank account. That was our like claim to fame. And
Wow.
so I was like, I've made it, right? Like everything's
Mm-hmm.
great. Like I've done all the work. I was the first one in my family to go to college, grew up, the single mom in poverty. And I was like, okay, I went to UC Berkeley. Like I've checked all the boxes. Like this guy's impressive, right? I was completely dead inside. I was like looking around the bank and I'm going, this is not my jam. This is not for me. And I ended up leaving the bank one day, right around the time I turned 30. And I found a book by Martha Beck, who I like to call like the OG of life coaches. She's been a life coach forever. she she wrote a book called Finding Your Own North. She has several, but this was back in like 2000 or late 90s. And it was called Finding Your Own North Star. I sat down on the floor. It was one of those moments you're like, okay, this is speaking to me. I can't even go find a seat. Literally sat on the floor and read the whole entire book cover to cover until they kicked me out of the Borders back in the day when they had Borders. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a teacher. Like this is my calling. I had tried a little bit. I had taught Spanish part-time when I was in college, and it was like so hard and so scary. And so I started with middle school, which was a terrible idea. And so trying to teach Spanish in middle school was not the greatest start. But anyway, so I felt like this is my calling. And as many of your listeners will know, once you really get in line with when you're aligned with the universe and your calling and your purpose, it's like, whoa. So literally that night, my friend's like, hey, do you want to go to dinner? And then I went to dinner with 5 people that were teachers that were all about my age. And they're like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, I work at a bank. They're like, oh, we're all teachers. And so it was like, boom, the first, like right away, right? Like I got clear.
Mm-hmm.
I told the universe, like, hey, I'm going for it. I'm quitting my job and I'm doing it. And then within, a matter of hours, I had people reflecting back to me like, this is the greatest thing we've ever done. And we work in really difficult urban schools. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. And so I took the leap and I moved back to California, which is where I'm from. And my wife and I just took a big leap. And my wife is amazing. And she was like, okay, whatever you want to do, like we're gonna make it work. And I started working in Oakland Public Schools, which is an urban district. And it was amazing. I loved every second of working with the kids, but found the system to be like really dysfunctional and disillusioning. And so I found the charter school space and ended up getting this amazing charter school. That's where the 10, actually 9 of the 10 award winning schools were done in this charter school in the Bay Area. We went from 1 to 9 schools in 9 years. So we were like schools at the back of a parking lot and, modular portable buildings to 9 schools across the country, $50 million from Mark Zuckerberg. And we were just churning out these schools like crazy. And so I ended up going from from teacher to principal, and then became the assistant superintendent. And my life was driving around the Bay Area in traffic, taking every single phone call you can imagine, right? Like
Yeah.
not really the conscious life. It was the go, 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 go. And then I was approaching 40 and I felt like this feels very familiar. Like I'm not happy. I'm
Mm.
not feeling in line with my purpose, and I'm not working with kids anymore. I've basically become like a corporate executive, and it was just telling people what to do and kind of running around and just dealing with problems all day. So I once again had another big change when I turned 40 and I quit my job and I started my own school from scratch. So I went from like white picket fence, 2 kids, 1 and 3 with a mortgage, great salary, great benefits, to nothing. And we did it again. My wife was amazing again. She's like, okay, like when you get that calling, we know that we got to follow it. And so we moved to Sacramento, which is where she's from. And I started a school here. And that was 9 years ago. And then in the middle, I had a lot of awakening moments, like health moments, where I ended up having I got Bell's palsy and was facial paralysis and was in bed for like 3 months straight. So there's a lot of sort of that part of the journey too, which I can get into, but that's
Mhm.
giving you the broad brush of just kind of like how I've ended up here. And then what I'm doing now is I'm helping other people open what's called micro schools across the world. And these are like really small schools that pretty much anyone can open. And it's like this really cool revolution in education that I'm excited about.
Oh,
That's
that's amazing.
awesome.
It's such a great story. I think it's like that moment where you're like, as soon as you decided to take the leap and then you end up with, five other teachers out to dinner, like
Yes.
that never amazes me, even though I feel like I hear it so often. And it's like,
Yeah.
it really is just the way that the universe works. And it's
Yes.
still like, what an amazing place to live and fun game we get to play.
Absolutely.
Did you have something? Okay. Yeah, I'd like to almost like we slow down a little bit and talk a little bit more about your awakening,
Yeah.
which sounds really, really interesting. So we spend a little bit of time there as you sort of had this, like you said, you had this moment where you ran into some health
Yeah.
problems and start kind of
Yeah.
changing the way we see.
Yeah. So right around that time that I was quitting my executive job, I started kind of getting that call for, I started following Richard Rohr, who talks a lot about the second half of life. He works with men and he works with like men in prison, but he works with all different types of men. And he talks a lot about like the second half of life. So I was approaching kind of this, the midlife crisis thing that we talk about in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And I was approaching that phase and I was like, whoa, I'm that guy. Like I want to buy a sports car. Like I'm not happy. Like, what am I going to do here? And so instead of going that direction, I was like, let me start listening to some wisdom teachers. And really, at that point, I didn't really know any of this. I didn't understand it, but something within me was like, okay, just start listening to these people. And so from there, I ended up taking a conscious parenting course with Dr. Shafali Sabari, who you can find her at drshafali.com. And she's been on Oprah and she's amazing. And so I really just thought I was taking a parenting course. And it was, I think I started in January of 2018. And then by like March, I was just in deep with like inner child healing. And I was, realizing that I had been abused as a child, that I was sexually abused. I didn't remember. So then that came up and dealing with a lot of trauma when I was 8, like my mom abandoning me. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much deep like stuff stuck in this body that it needs to be excavated. So I went like all in. When you first start awakening, you're like, I'm taking every course. And it was like the way I like opened those schools, I was like, all right, let's do it. Like I did Wim Hof, the ice bath method. I did like hypnosis. I did inner child heal, like every modality you can imagine, to the point where it was like a little bit unconscious, right? I was just like, then my friends are like, hey, you can go a little too far on this. Like, remember, you're not trying to attack all this in 6 months. Like this is a slow journey. So I kind of took a step back but through that process, I really got in touch with my true nature. I was like, okay, this is who I really am. And, through the stories I shared, there were these moments where I had that clarity, right? Like the intuitive clarity around like, I got to quit my job, I got to move. And so I really started to understand. One of my favorite teachers is Michael Beckwith. He's got the Agape, an International Spiritual Center. So he's one that's remained. You know how you kind of like switch up teachers based on where your journey's going? He's never left. Like I still listen to him all the time. And he's been amazing. But it's like, I just started to find that true part of myself and really get in line with that. And then started doing the work on like bringing it into my daily life. So as you can imagine, being a man and being very practical, I was like, yeah, I love all this, but it has to be applied in my daily life. So I pretty much turned it upside down. So now I'm like, I want to spend 80% of my day where my state of being is like highly conscious and I'm aware and I'm seeing the world from my highest state of being. And then like 20% of the day, I'll give myself kind of like, reacting in the ways that aren't the great way. And, so I've kind of been really focusing on how do I bring this into my daily life and really help others. So I also have a program called the Wise Warrior where I help other leaders and other people. It's kind of like a side project, but I really want to help other people live like this because I feel like I was living so unconsciously and my body was falling apart and it was really quite scary when we were in the emergency room and we thought I was having a stroke and it's like this is not necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I resonate so much with it. So thank you, Dave, for sharing and being vulnerable about it. I think,
Yeah.
Dan can attest to this. I too feel like I had a midlife crisis at 30, and I was,
Yeah.
in real estate at corporate jobs. I worked
Oh
for
yeah.
high
So you
hotels,
get
and
it. Yeah.
oh my gosh. And I remember like being in our apartment in Los Angeles, like in the fetal position next to my bed, just being like, who am
Yes.
I? Like hysterically crying. But it also, I like to use the term, it was a beautiful destruction of the older version
Yes.
of me that needed to just be let go of as I step
Absolutely.
into and birth this new version. So I resonate so much, and I
Yes.
thank you for that. Yeah. And us too, God, we've
Yeah.
done every single Wim Hof, the Michael Beckwers, we've read every single book. Yeah, to the point where it does kind of get exhausting.
Yeah. I think you can get to a point sometimes where it's like you're just like all over the place trying to do everything.
We're like a kid in the candy store. Like, what else can I
Yeah.
eat?
Yeah.
It's like the
Exactly.
dopamine hits too that come because it makes you feel so good to release these
Yes.
aspects that need to be let
Yeah.
go of.
Yes.
But then we also must honor the process of integration. There is that period
Yes.
of time of reflection and slowness that certainly
Yes.
for myself, I didn't tend to at first.
Yeah, yes. I think like when you're doing too much, you're jumping from one thing to the next, and you don't see any of them through. You can
Yes.
kind of get stuck, and I definitely bounced around with some issues there, where like I didn't know who I was. Like same thing Lisa's saying. It's like, who am I? What is going on? Am I the
Right.
one that's crazy, or is everybody else?
Exactly. That's
And
part
I
of the
think,
process too. Yeah.
right. Was it difficult for you to like sort of implement these things into your life, or kind of maybe bring them into your work, or
Yeah.
did it kind of come naturally?
Such a great question. I think all of us struggle with this kind of like, you
Mm-hmm.
hear these stories about like, well, I quit my job or I moved to Bali. And it's like, for the majority of us, that's not really an option. Right. And so
Right.
the way it worked for me, it was again, the universe is very benevolent and gentle. And so when I was ready to wake up, it was like I was really ready to wake up. So that's why I think I had the health problems and dealt with my inner child trauma and stuff like that. But then it was kind of like more smooth. And so, for example, my board chair at my school, because I had started a nonprofit, and he was kind of like, "You're not coming to work for a while. Like we'll have the principal run the school," and he kind of like put me on a timeout, and so that was a gift. And then after a while, he was like, "We need you actually to move to consulting and not run the school anymore because you're clearly not like this is not healthy for you and your family." And I was like, so he was a gift, right, from the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really ask me. It's just like, this is what you need to do, and I'm in charge, so you're going to do it. And I'm like, honestly, that's what I needed right now. If you asked me, I would have said no. So that helped. So then I was able to, instead of working every day in the school all day, I was able to work Tuesdays and Fridays from home. And though I do always tell the story about how before I had that luxury of like 2 days from home, I actually would meditate in the janitor's closet every day. So I
I
always tell
love
the
that.
story. Yeah, because people are like, I don't have time to meditate. And I'm like, that is your ego convincing you that you don't have to. Like, we all have time to meditate. So for me, it was like in the conscious parenting course, Dr. Shafali said, if you want to be in this course, you got to meditate every day for 20 minutes. Like, that's a non negotiable. And it's like, okay. And so I had to meet that, that non negotiable. So when I was working in the school, I would literally go in and I would greet all the families at 8:30 or whatever. And then I would run upstairs to the janitor's closet, and I would go and have my little chair, and the janitor and I had an agreement, and I would sit there and I would put on a little guided meditation because it was, kind of crazy. And I would do that every day. And that was it's like once you start to, Dan, I know you're like really into fitness. And I always say, like, when I start to work out, I want to work out more and I want to eat healthy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, when I started to like focus on this life and meditation and mindfulness, it's like I wanted more of it. And then, so if I did it 20 minutes a day in the morning and before I went to bed, then all of a sudden I started having more of like a meditative state throughout the day, and it got easier and easier. But yeah, I was really lucky in that I mean, lucky slash like, I was creating my own reality, but I was able to get a lot of free time from working all those crazy years in the Bay Area. Like I needed that break. And honestly, for the last 5 years, I've been a consultant, and I always tell people it seems like I do a lot, but I do not work that much. Like I really do have a very nice work-life balance. And, my kids are 10 and 13. So I spend tons of time with them. Like my whole life revolves around what they need, and my work comes second. And so it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's an amazing way to live, to be able to really focus on your priorities, and
yeah,
you're having a huge impact without having to do a ton of work, which is
right. Because it's
ideal.
coming from the source. It's coming from true nature, right? Like
mm-hmm.
when I teach my wife's warrior classes, I'm always like, look, you guys, you can, if you spend like a lot of time in your highest state of being, even if it's just throughout your day, you're just focusing on it. Like when you're going to the grocery store, when you're driving, like you're always just trying to be in a meditative state. Then when you're like ready to work, you can do something that would maybe take you 10, 20 hours in like 2 hours. Like I can sit here to just it's flow state, but like 2 hours later, I'm like, God, that would have taken me like 3 days, like 5 years ago. All of a sudden I'm done. And like, okay, my days, I'm good for the rest of the day. I just spent 2 hours doing high impact things and, podcasts like this. And now I can go and do whatever else needs to be done, whether that's like, meditating or hanging out with my kids or exercising or whatever else is going to just really create that state of being for me. That's really, really focused on the higher vibration.
Yeah, I love that. It's just like what you said before. It's like once you get clear on your intention and you're present and you know who you want to be, then all of a sudden you get really lucky.
Yes.
Which is
just the way,
which
I'm like, I don't think we should even use. Yeah, we shouldn't even use the word lucky. Like I caught myself.
Right,
earlier.
I know.
Like, it's not lucky because lucky, there's no such thing as lucky or coincidence, right? Like everything's happening for your greatest good. And if you can really get to a place where you can say, oh, even that's happening for my greatest good. Wow. I didn't want to get, sick and have Bell's palsy or have all these crazy things, but like, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. Right. Because it was bringing me to the state that I am at now, that I am here.
What was the sort of like the lesson in the Bell's palsy, you think? Or what's the biggest thing you took from it?
Oh yeah, for sure. So when the book is written, this will be like so my drug was, growing up poor, growing up with a single mother, and my mom, but mentally, depressed and a lot of mental illness. So she left several times. So we had a very traumatic, my two siblings, a very traumatic childhood, like very major abandonment issues and abuse issues. So as I kind of delved into that and got clear on, you got to get to the root. And for me, every time I'm triggered or there's a catalyst, it's always like once I dig and good, I'm like, okay, I can do this really fast now. Like it's always about, I feel abandoned, I feel abused, right? Because that wounded inner child, that's like the thing. So it's like something so small, like my wife not responding to a phone call. It's like, oh God, it's what's happening right now. Oh, okay. That little boy feels like, someone's not listening to him, someone's abandoning him. So it's like from that to, somebody like not talking to me as a friend or something. It's like, oh my God, like the major catalyst now, like, why are they abandoning me? And so that's been like a really important part of the journey too.
Yes, I resonate very much with the abandoned inner child, and I very appreciate the diving deep into that. And I wanted to reflect actually really quickly, Dave, on something that you said before with meditation, because I know that this will probably come up when we begin diving more deeply into mindfulness. Once you did the 20-minute meditations in the January, which I think is just amazing. And also no excuse for anybody not to make this time. And Dan and I think are the biggest components of meditation, and it certainly changed my life in the biggest way, because I used to be able to not do it in the same way. I didn't feel like I had the time, but I really truly didn't want to listen to the horrific thoughts that I had in between my ears. That was the most challenging thing. And I think that is kind of overlooked, or maybe people are not possibly being honest with themselves. Oh, I don't have time. Do you really not have time, or do you really just not want to listen to these horrible thoughts in your head? Because I know that was a big part of it. But once you begin doing it, after weeks, months, or even a year, you so beautifully stated, your life begins to become a meditation. And I think that this is a very big teacher that I don't think it's spoken about within this wellness community. I think that is truly the goal of it, because when your life becomes a meditation, now you're able to decipher, like you said, oh my gosh, my wife's not picking up the phone. Holy shit, what's going on? Wait a minute. Is that thought actually mine? Is it the inner child talking, or something so insignificant, like I'm not worthy, or I don't believe I can do this? Wait a minute. Okay, I'm listening to those thoughts. Are they actually mine? Are they impeding what's going to transpire throughout the day? And I love that you're able, like you spoke so beautifully, being able to tap into that so that you're now in the state of flow. The divine, higher source, God, universe, whatever you'd like to call it, is now flowing through you. So you're able to perform tasks so much more easily because you're not resisting it. Your ego's no longer getting in the way because you're able to recognize it. You're able to create this sustainable life at this beautiful pace where it seems like everything is synchronistically flowing, but it's you're doing it, and it's life
Exactly.
responding through you.
That's it. That's it precisely. And what you said about the thoughts, when I first started, okay, so years ago I bought a meditation book and I could not do it because of what you said, because for me it wasn't the thoughts, it was the nervous system. Because my nervous system was in total overdrive. So I mentioned Wim Hof. When I did the Wim Hof method, it was like early on in my awakening, and the instructor, bless his heart, he was like, it was all these guys that were kind of like, hey, let's go. We run marathons. They were like jumping in the bath and just jumping out. And then here comes like little wounded David. And he's like, like freaking out. Like I couldn't even breathe because my nervous system, anytime there was like any kind of fear because of that little, abandoned child, like he freaks out and like the body freaks out. So basically he was like kind of rubbing my back and he's like, just breathe, just breathe. And they teach you the whole breathing method before they get you in. They spend like a week. Like, this is not just about an ice bath. This is about the like actual breathing and getting into the flow with your breath so that you can do that in your daily life. And so when I was doing that kind of stuff, I would always just like my whole body would kind of just go into like fight or flight. And it was like, it was like someone had a gun to my head. So Wim Hof actually really helped me because it helped me see that. And then similarly with meditation, I started finding other friends in this Shefali group was amazing because it was 600 people across the world. So we had like a real community. And so I found, again, like attracts like. So I found the exact people that had also been abused and that were dealing with this. And they were like, oh, David, like meditation is really hard when you have this type of trauma because you sit down and like the demons are like really freaking out. Like, oh no, we're not going to be safe, like, and the ego is like, I'm not letting go of this. This is my grasp on you. Like the moment you're not going to let this drive your life, that's going to be the moment we lose you. And so for me, it was always like, it was achievement, 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 right? Like I went to Berkeley, then I went to Stanford, and then, I was working at this high performing charter school. It's like my pain body was fed by achievement. And so when I realized when I realized the root issues were, if I could just keep achieving, then I would be loved, and it's like, I remember the Elton John movie, and he's like sitting on the floor of his mansion. I think like his mom or dad wouldn't talk to him. And at this point, he's a billionaire. He's got like all these amazing records. If you remember this movie, and he's like sitting and he's totally drugged up. Like he's done every drug he can imagine. Yes. Right. And he's just crying and he's like, my dad doesn't love me.
Yes.
I'm gay or whatever it was. And I'm like, that was me. That's all of us. Like, we just keep going for that next external, for me, it was like, okay, if I get a degree or a reward or a higher salary or whatever it may be, then like, I'm going to feel loved. And then as we know, the ego is going to keep going for, you win, like I play basketball, we win the championship. And the next thing the person says is, okay, when are we winning the next one? I'm like, bro, can we just enjoy the championship for like 5 seconds? Like, so your ego is always looking to like conquer something, and you're constantly going to be in that fight or flight and that fear that, unless you do something, you're not going to be loved. And that getting to the root of that will change your whole entire life.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Beautifully said. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the nervous system aspect of it. That is definitely a component.
I want to kind of let me back up a little bit here, and like, what was it that like kind of what was the calling to education? I know you said like you read that first book and instantly like, oh, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, what is it about teaching that attracted you?
Oh, I love this so much because I can share with people that you have a purpose and you're not sure what it is, but like you really know what it is. So I actually, and you're going to think it's like a box of something, but it's actually this like cool tapestry that you can like see through your life, at least in my experience through this story. So I remember like I had a really bad experience in kind of traditional public school because I grew up in Santa Barbara, which is a very affluent area, but I was the poor kid in Santa Barbara. So I was like totally ostracized. I was always like the outsider. And I just, by high school, I like didn't even want to show up. So I missed tons of school, but I was really smart. So I like got good grades just by like playing the system. So when I got to college, again, first one in my family, I went to community college, I went to UC Berkeley. I was like, I really want to help kids like me. But then I thought, I can't even imagine being in the system that I was in because it just felt so impersonal and, like the bullying that they let happen. I was like, I need to do it differently. But throughout my childhood, I always had this kind of like connection to teaching. And again, as a basketball player, I couldn't imagine myself teaching in a school. So I just wanted to coach basketball. And then when I started coaching basketball, I thought it was gonna be all about performance and, winning the championships. And then it was like, the story I always tell is like my first time ever coaching basketball with seventh grade girls. And, we got a technical shot and there's one girl that was like literally terrible, right? Like she was terrible, but she was like the sweetest girl ever. And I'm like, you know what? This is not about winning. This is about teaching them life lessons. So I'm going to have her shoot the 2 free throws. She's never, what happened? God universe was like, oh, okay, we're going to reward you for that decision. She made both of them. And like the look on her face, like, oh my God, I just made 2 free throws in front of everybody. It was like, okay, now I understand why I love teaching. It's not because I want to win all the games. It's not because, and so I had this like spark of like, oh, I love this so much. And then every job I ever had, I was always mentoring or teaching. Like when I was at the bank, I would be like, hey, do you want to go out for lunch? Like, let's talk about your career. Like I would just, it was so natural that's what drove me. And that's what just fed me. When I was in DC at the bank, I was teaching Ethiopian immigrants. I was like taking 4 buses from Northwest to like Southeast to the kind of not as nice area to go to this community center and work with like 20 Ethiopian immigrants that had just arrived last week to teach them English. And I'm like, that's the happiest hour of my week. Right. So I started like feeling the joy and understanding that joy within you, what it is. Like, so for me, the thread was like teaching. It's always been teaching. Right. And so whether it was like coaching basketball, tutoring, teaching in traditional classrooms, teaching teachers as a principal, and then teaching principals as assistant superintendent, and, now doing coaching and life coaching, it's like, there's always a different thread. So the box it's not a box. It's just like the thread of what really drives you. And then of course, whenever I do like numerology or astrology or any of those types of modalities, they're always like, you're a teacher. And I'm like, yeah, I know, thanks, I appreciate the validation, but like I already know that, right? So I think it's always been something that I was born to do. And then I was really good at it. So when I left the bank and then I ended up like, I'm sitting in this high school as a student teacher, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Like last week I was wearing a 3-piece suit. It was literally like we started in summer. I was doing summer school in like June. So summer school with teenagers, like they don't want to be there. And I was in so much resistance to the truth, right? This is another good theme, right? It's like, I knew the truth was I was supposed to be working with those teenagers, but my mind was like, you're supposed to be wearing a 3-piece suit. Like you're a banker, you're a business dude. Like, why are you sitting with these teenagers that are like doing this, being so annoying? And I had about a week of that. And then by like the second week, I realized I'm like, oh, this is what you're supposed to be doing, right? And I started talking to them, and they bring out the joy, and it's like, it's so much fun working with adolescents because the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. And they're like, Dan, when we started, I was like, oh, he's got his inner child is like, it's going right now. Like he's super excited. I was like, it's like, this is like your energy at the beginning is working with teenagers. Like that's what they're like all day. Well, they're either like really depressed and emo, or like yes, really happy. But either way, you're getting like a full authentic version of them. And I was like, whoa, this is so much fun. Like life can be fun. I'm not making any money. I'm making like $40,000 a year, but life is so much fun. And it's so meaningful when you see that kid like get it and you build these deep relationships. And I ended up, the last time I taught a high school class was 2010. So they're like in their 30s now. We still talk like all the time.
Oh, cool.
Text, Facebook. Well, they don't really use Facebook, but they'll use it for me. Like, Instagram. So we still talk. And it's like, when you find that thing that really brings you meaning, not the external thing, but like that internal thing that brings you the joy, that's what you just got to keep following.
Yeah, I love that. So inspiring. So like kind of along the way, it's like, where was like the sort of the lack of fulfillment? I know you said like you kind of got into it, you end up feeling more like you were back in that corporate mentality again, but like what about education was missing, basically, is really my question.
Yeah, I think, education, like any industry is a business at the end of the day. Like you have to make sure that you have enough money to pay the bills, and you have to be smart about it. And I was always like the business guy. Like my teacher friends would be like, can you just stop with all the like, well, in the business world, we do this. Like they'd get so annoyed at me, but because I felt like it was so backwards, I'm like, what are you doing right now? Like, so I would always be that guy. But what ended up happening was, as I got farther and farther away from the actual kids and the actual like community and the parents and the families, like what was really bringing me joy, because I was going for external fulfillment, right? It's like, okay, you want to climb the ladder, you want to evolve, you want to get better as a professional. So it was like, yeah, I want to be a principal now. I can take the stuff I did as a teacher and I can bring it into a whole school. Like, oh, now I can bring all the stuff I did as a principal and I can teach other principals. So there was that real like nugget of teaching that brought me into that next phase. That's like the light side. But the dark side was now, okay, now we're dealing with corporate politics and when you take 50 million from somebody, I don't need to tell you what that means. Like you now they own you, right? And so
Yeah.
now it was like the conversations were not necessarily about like kids and going to college and what they needed. It was more about like, well, we got to get these outcomes and we got to make sure that, and it just became like, if I closed my eyes, I was like, I'm basically in the bank again, right? And so I just really lost that fulfillment there. And then that's why I just felt clear that it was time to go to kind of go back to the grassroots and build my own school again. And that's what brought me back to like, I want to go sit with the families. I want to be in the school. I want to be able to really connect to the mission and not make it about the business side.
Cool. Yeah, that's kind of really what I want to ask you about. Is I'm really curious, like what these schools are like what's different about the schools that you're starting compared to maybe what most of us are used to.
Yeah, well, I think most of us are used to the factory model system, which was really built in like the late 1800s to batch kids. Like a small percentage are going to college, another percentage maybe doing like more kind of, they're going to be middle class or lower middle class, and then the vast majority are going to go work in factories or kind of low paying jobs. And so that's the system that we built. And so if you think about like our high schools and our middle schools, it's not as prevalent in elementary, but if you think about like maybe your middle and high school, unless you went to a private school or a different type of school, but a traditional public school, you're going to have 3,000 kids in your high school. You're going to have 6 classes, 52, not even 55 an hour, 52-minute classes, right? Because it's like the factory model. They got to do it like exactly by the minute. You have 52-minute classes, and your teachers are going to have about 170 to 180 kids. You're going to have about 35 kids in your class, and you're literally on the conveyor belt. You're just going into a class, you're going out of a class. And so our schools are exactly the opposite. They're built on not the conveyor belt, but like deep relationships and personal, like really knowing the families, really knowing the kids. So we got to keep them smaller. Like our high schools were 400. My elementary school is about 200. And then the schools I'm actually working on now are even smaller. They're like 50 kids per school because because what I really believe is with any kid, whether it's like a real, high flying, affluent, like family has money, or a kid that's like low income and maybe doesn't have the resources, they really need to be seen and heard. I mean, it's just common sense. They need to be seen and heard. They need to be valued. They need to feel like someone cares. What did I say about my experience? If I didn't show up to school, nobody ever noticed. Like, how do you go to school in an affluent suburb for 13 years and have an atrocious attendance record and not have one person say to you, are you okay? Like, is everything okay? Right. Because I was the quiet kid. I was always hiding. And so I feel like, our schools are really about the curriculum, and the academics are like project-based learning and experiential learning and really experiencing the world and trying to make it as connected to like what's outside of the classroom as possible, and not just, memorizing facts. And then there's a real heavy dose of what's called social emotional learning, which I call the mind, body, spirit curriculum. And it's, so it's like really teaching to the whole child. So it's everything that you might think about a normal school, we pretty much turn it on its head and do it the opposite.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Sounds amazing.
Neither of us really had a great experience with school.
I did go to private school though, which
you did? Okay.
I
they're not much different. They're a little bit smaller, but then they have different problems typically.
Yes, and I constantly ask Dan, because we met in high school, but just so that well, kind of. So I went to a private preparatory school in Massachusetts. But it's not something that's on the West Coast, because when we lived in California, I would ask all of our friends there. We had at our school what was called a postgraduate year. So it was anybody who had graduated high school could do like an intermediate 13th grade, which Dan did.
What I did,
and that's how we met. So he had like repeated his senior year at my private.
That's so cool. Okay.
So something it's common with either kids who get in a lot of trouble or athletes. So I did as an athlete, as a football player, like it was an opportunity to get another year of high school football and be able to get recruited or whatever.
Cool.
So it was really cool. So I like boarded there, and I lived on campus, or at least had gone to the school like through her whole career, but she lived in the city and lived at home.
But it's always fascinating. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying the different version with private schools is that a lot of times they'll be smaller, but then what they end up doing is like being so obsessed with achievement and like academics that they like just take the spirit out of the children, right? Because it's like so much about, like, their parents are like, we're going to spend 30 grand to have you go here, so you better get straight A's and go to Princeton, right? And so that becomes the whole entire, like, and the kids are stressed out and the teachers are stressed out, the parents are kind of running the school because they're paying so much money. So it's like different problems, but it's a similar, it's not necessarily the same conveyor belt, but it's like this external achievement obsession that brings a lot of mental health issues, and kids are now going for rewards because it's something on the outside, and there's no conversation about like intrinsic motivation or internal drive.
Yeah.
I see you nodding your head, Elise. So this must be.
Well, I'm like, have you read my journal? And it's funny because Dan, I always ask people who didn't go to my high school, like, what it was like, because they were with like thousands and thousands of people. Like, I think our graduating senior class was like maybe 200. It was very small, but the pressure academic wise was just, I have retrained my brain and I am working on this, but I have always felt like the dumb kid. Like, I never, ever felt smart enough. And Dan, I'm not just saying this because I love him, but he's one of the smartest people I know. And our senior year, I would have note cards galore. I would be studying, and Dan wouldn't even open his book until like 10 minutes before. Like, and I'm like, what's going on? And he would get like an A or a B. And I was here getting like C's.
That was me.
Yeah.
I know. It's like the men and the women too. It's a lot of times it's that way.
Yeah. It sounded, when you were talking to school before, it sounded familiar. I was kind of saying, always like kind of disengaged and not that interested, but like I would listen to the teacher, but I wouldn't do any homework. And I would just kind of like figure it out. It wasn't that hard. But also, like, I never got like great grades because I didn't care that much. But I think my biggest issue, especially like looking back, I feel like I've had to like unlearn so much as I grow and develop. But it was like I was taught what to know, not like how to learn. Or how to think. I was told what to think and not how to think, basically.
Yeah, that's it.
Which I think is massive, and it's like it is like they're making factory workers, so they don't want people thinking for themselves. So I've had to really work to start like thinking for myself and figuring things out. And then the other thing you said, like the mind, body, spirit, and teaching the entire child is amazing. I think so much of it is the opposite in like the traditional schooling, where you're kind of like separated from your intuition and your feelings and your emotions, and it's like, no, just learn this, don't sit there, be quiet. Like, you ask permission if you want to go to the bathroom. Like, there's ridiculous things.
It's absolutely that, and a lot of the whole thing's built for efficiency. And actually, people say the system's broken, but the system's actually not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is like, there's 52 minutes, we don't have time for you to go to the bathroom. Like, the whole belief is that children are empty vessels. So the job of the teacher is to pour their head with information. And I mean, let's be clear, it's 2024 and we don't need information anymore. That's at our fingertips. We need to know how to learn and how to think. And so the process of learning is like the most important part of what we do in our schools. It's like, let's teach you how to learn something. And then, this concept is kind of a newer concept called growth mindset. And it's a belief that you can learn anything, right? And so you teach that to a kid. I mean, imagine if you guys had a school when you were younger where they're teaching you to be embodied and to listen to your intuition, and that there's a connection between, your thoughts and your health and your fitness and your diet, and, and like then you can actually trust yourself. Like, that's amazing. And by the time you get to high school, you would just be like, I'm not dealing with any of these teachers. Like, if you don't actually teach them the way that I want you to teach, I'm just going to go get homeschooled, So that's kind of, I have the school that I started that's in year 9. That's kind of where we're at now. It's a kindergarten through 8th grade. And we have our first class of 8th graders. And we're like, where are they going to go? Like maybe we have to open a high school, but anyway, so.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a challenge, I think, to go through that schooling system and then walk into a regular high school would be. Do you have them? Are they all in? I know they're really small schools. Are they separated by grade and just really small classes?
Yeah, so there's like 2 things going on here, because I'm kind of transitioning from charter schools to these private micro schools. And so the charter school that I currently have, the one that I told you that I started, 9 years ago, that one is small, but not like super small. And that one, we tried to do a lot of these creative things, but because it's still authorized by a school district and there's a lot of like regulations and red tape, we had to dilute a lot of it. So that's why I really like this micro school movement, because it's really small. Like, really small. Like, a micro school is could be 5 kids to 150. So it's the idea is that you can have multi-age classes. So it's kind of like going back to the one room schoolhouse. You have these small one building, you have maybe a few teachers. So I helped my friend start one in South Dakota, and she actually started one right outside of the Native American reservation that she grew up on. She was a principal and a teacher in the public schools trying to help, her community for years. And then we met, and I was like, you know what, let's go do a micro school. Like, I want to see how you do it, and we'll do it together. And it's thriving. It's in year 3, and it has like 40 kids. It's like kindergarten through 5th grade, but it's multi-age. They go out on the farm. There's like, there's community elders that come in. They're learning the Lakota language. Like, it's just this beautiful place. And so that's the vision, is that now, instead of me opening and running all these schools, that I'm actually, kind of like coaching where you have an affiliate program, like I'm actually helping people build these schools in their community and creating all of the, like, trying to minimize all of the obstacles. So it's like, let's help you get a small facility. Here's the curriculum. Here's the mind, body, spirit curriculum. Here are all the projects, here's all the stuff you need. And now you're empowering people, teachers or families, to really be small business owners and to change the education system, not from the top down, but from the bottom up, from like a grassroots movement. So I'm like super excited about it.
Yeah.
And that's the like educator turned entrepreneur, because now I'm really working on, how do you scale this from an entrepreneurial perspective? How do you go raise the money? And how do you, we have a vision to have 200 schools in the next 500 years, which is like going to impact 20,000 families. And so all over, right? All over the world. Doesn't have to just be the US. And so we're super excited, and we're working now we're at the point where, people are starting to apply, and we're hoping to have 10 partners in the next few months so that we can have people start opening these schools in the fall of 2025.
That's so cool.
That is very cool.
I think it's like I said before, like, I think the world needs this. And I think it's just like, it's such a really cool thing that even a few years ago, I think the idea of this sounded crazy to most people. Why would we just start a different kind of school? You can't do that. Kids are going to be weird. Whatever objections you would have. And I think that there's so many people now homeschooling, and so many people looking for alternatives. I think it's perfect timing.
And this is a cool part of the story from a conscious perspective. So when I was deep in my meditation, so when I had those 2 days at home in the first year of my awakening, I would sometimes meditate for 5 hours.
Wow.
I would meditate because I had so much pain and so much stuff that was stuck, that it was that's what I needed. I just needed to sit there and just be like, tell me, just share, and I was getting messages about all my friends, and my teachers were like, you don't share unless they ask. Just don't, but I was like, oh, she needs to leave her husband. Oh, he needs to, and I was I was getting all of these downloads. I'm like, wow, this is crazy, man. I'm so psychic. It's I was coming into all these powers I didn't know I had. But one of the things that I saw really clearly in 2016 was this vision. That's what's crazy about this story. So I sat in meditation for sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours on Tuesdays and Fridays, because my kids were out of the house. My wife was out of the house. I had an empty house. I would just sit, and I would just listen, and I would just meditate. And I saw very clearly that there was going to, I never know the timeline, but in the future, there was going to be this movement where people were going to be, really starting schools, and they would be small, and it would be grassroots, and it would be revolutionary, paradigm shifting. And because I was at that point, I still was so trained to do and execute. I started writing it all down, and I was like, okay, I got to make this happen tomorrow. And I was like, okay, who do I need to talk to? And then I was stressed out and creating all this suffering. And then a few years later, when the pandemic hit, I was like, oh, I don't need to do anything right now. I can just sit back and let the world see what I already saw, which is schools are falling apart. Families are going to ask for something different. And then I'm sitting back, and I'm just watching, and I'm watching, and I'm like, and your spiritual egos can be like, I knew this all along. See, but it was just kind of that's the truth that you can really access if you are really, really tapped in. And then it became a choiceless choice, and almost this is your purpose. Because I would add, and Michael Beckwith, he always says, ask every day, how can I serve? In your meditation, how can I serve? How can I serve? And so I would ask that, and the answer would be just go talk to this person, go do this, go read this. And it would just be kind of it was I was building it. It was building the connections, finding the people. And everyone kept asking me, when are you doing something about education? You're doing all this conscious work, and you're still just not doing anything. And I'm like, that's not the right question. The question is, when will God, the universe, move me into a space where it's time for me to quote unquote do something about education. And so it's been fascinating because the mind is really impatiently wanting me to do more and do this and do that. And it's like now it's all just like all come together like in the last 3 months. And it's happening kind of like the story I shared about, the teacher showing up that night. And like with my other school, a 54,000 square foot building was just placed in my lap. I hired a broker. He didn't find it. Somebody emailed me like, hey, there's a building over there. Have you looked? I'm like, my broker didn't tell me about that. And it just fell into our lap. And there were like 4 synchronicities like that neighborhood. And then the building came. And so now it's happening again where people are reaching out to me and being like, hey, I know this investor and he really loves schools. And like, would you want $1 million? Like if you do have it all set up. And I'm like, yeah, I think that would help the vision. So it's been absolutely amazing, but really it's because I've done so much of the inner work and I've really, really excavated a lot of the blockages and a lot of the like false self. And so I'm able to operate through this clear vision, the higher vision. And oh, there's still daily issues and daily catalysts. And I have to have a conversation with my wounded inner child like every day, sometimes 10 times a day, where it's just like sit down for 5 minutes, be like, okay, what do you want to say? It's like, well, we don't trust that person. What if they do that? And are you sure you want to do that? And are you going to do this? And I'm like, these are all really good. Like now we're working in partnership. Yeah, I shouldn't trust that guy. Let's get a legal agreement before anything happens, And so it's been really great.
It really shows that you've done the work. I think just talking with you, like your presence and like your certainty, like there's something you can feel the energy, and it's powerful.
Yeah, the inner child is definitely excited. Like you gave Dan that compliment. I think you're just reflecting back beautifully. I feel like this just comes so nicely full circle, because as you started describing your background, just saying you had this midlife crisis as a banker, 3-piece suit, like, which is really the epitome of the, American dream. And
Yeah.
I'm using the quotation marks, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love hearing stories of this, because when we put that faith, that trust, that prayer, whatever you'd like to call it, into the universe, like you had no idea, but almost the uncertainty just unlocked the doors that allowed whatever to flow through you. And obviously I do want to commend you. And again, like I said, it's inspirational, but there is that piece to very much understand the work that must be done on ourselves. If you had just, and I'm being, I'm guessing here, if you had just gone from a banker to an educator without doing the work on yourself to truly understand these deep-rooted issues, traumas, problems, whatever that may have been, it might have been more difficult and the doors perhaps wouldn't open. But I think the inner child, I've heard someone say this, the inner child is the gateway to the intuitive nature. Like,
absolutely.
Because if it's wounded, it's not going to allow you to see a broader perspective or a different paradigm, because it's literally trapped within you. And it's like, I'm too scared, or no, I don't trust this. I don't feel safe. I don't feel protected. No, don't go there. So we're calling it work, but it's really just an understanding, and then having reverence for that. This child's trying to protect me. That's all it is. But now, like you said, flip it. Now you're able to have this dialogue. You're able to protect your inner child and say, yes, let's sit down, show me, tell me, let me listen, and then let's work through it together.
Absolutely. And I worked with Belinda Womack, who's an angel channeler. I found her on Inspire Nation, and my friends were like, you're working with an angel channeler? I'm like, hey, let's go. Let me see how your life is. And you tell me if you want to compare notes. But anyway, so she's amazing. And what she taught us was that there's like the wounded inner child and the divine inner child. And so your work is to, you're right. It's not called work. Your focus is to really get connected with that wounded part of you and really continue to heal and talk to and speak to, and then let the divine inner child be in charge. And so the visual that I share with my wife's warrior group, they always love it, is as I was healing my inner child, the Shefali group, we really worked on like the different ages. It's kind of similar to internal family systems. So really getting to know the inner child of different, and I was like, my 5-year-old, my 8-year-old, like 14. And then I was like, oh, 18's also one. And so I started to get to know this kind of like phases in my life that were really traumatic. And so I had this visual of them sitting in the car. And for a while, we would rotate who was driving, like who was in charge and who was driving. And adult David would always be like adult David, higher self David would always be like next to them in the passenger seat, and then there'd be other ones in the back seat. And it was like such a great visual, because as I went through the process and did it with other people, it's part of the thing that I do in my groups, is that then you start to feel like, oh, I'm handing the wheels to the 5-year-old. And a lot of people say like the 5-year-old of you is your most divine part of you, before you start to get all those kind of like, conditioning and everything. So it was no coincidence. And I'm like, the 5-year-old's driving my car now. Right. And so that like joy and that energy of the 5-year-old, I'm just like, yeah, let's go. Let's just have fun, and then it's always the adult and the higher self, like the divine parents are always right there. So that if there's any problems with the 5-year-old's trying to drive off a cliff, like, no, we can have fun, but we can have that much fun. So they're always there. And then the ones are in the backseat to be like, hey, remember what happened that one time when we were 14? So like, just think this part through. And it's like this beautiful connection of the inner children. But that piece from Belinda Womack, where she said, you really have to think about your wounded inner child and your divine child. Because a lot of times we'll put them together, and that just helped me.
Yeah. And I hope it's obvious as you're speaking and as we're having this conversation. I hope it's obvious to the listeners, but these inner children that we all have, this is not special to me, Dan, and Dave here. Everybody has them. We're talking about schools and what's in school children.
Exactly.
Like, I want to just make sure that, like,
thank you.
As we're wrapping up here, like this is it. We weren't taught this. I feel like I was not taught in school how to do this, as you so beautifully said. I like grapple with my emotions, understand what's going home in our family lives. And there's nothing wrong with what's going on with the family. If it's trauma, it's here to teach us lessons. But if we're not given the tools to properly handle that or leave space to have emotions, so it's just beautiful. I wanted to make sure that people know that we're talking about inner schools, which is obviously education is a big part of it. We're going to learn, all of these things. But what you're saying also, I know you're talking about mind, body, spirit, having this emotional connection just as much as, knowledge-based learning.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. And when I did my individual reading, because when I did this class with Belinda Womack, it was like a year and it was like really intense. But she would do individual readings with us. And she said to me, your purpose is to help the adults reparent and heal their inner child and help the next generation not have the same problems that the parents are having. Like really help this next generation. And these next generation of kids are so awake, and they're not have, even the millennials, I don't know how old you guys are, but like each generation's getting a little more like, we're not dealing with this crap. Right. So it's like, so that like my kids are 10 and 13 and they're just like, no, you're not putting me in a box. I'm not doing a 9-to-5 job. I'm not, and so these kids are like really free. And so they need schools where they can really thrive, because if we put them in the right environment, they're going to thrive, right? Instead of putting them in this square peg round hole. So she gave me my purpose. This was like a year ago. And again, I love that moment where you're like, oh, thank you. That's really validating. I already knew it, but it's like really cool to hear it being said from the angel channeler, because that really gives it a lot of validity.
Yeah. I actually want to almost like tag on to this a little bit as we're wrapping up. And I know this is a broad question, but I'd like to take a look at what that sort of mind, body, spirit curriculum looks like, and how this is being taught to kids in your schools.
Yeah. So the one I have currently, it was designed by my friend who has done a lot of this work, and I'm going to create my own, or we are going to create, because I don't know who it's going to be. You might even be part of it. So let's, keep in touch. Because I really do have a vision for the physical part, like the health and fitness part. I feel like that's got to be really, I mean, we all love our PE classes, right? So I think this could be done. Like one of my friends is opening a school, and he's worked with like one of the CrossFit champions or something, and they're building this whole school for kids around like all this health and fitness. I don't know enough to really speak eloquently about it, but yeah, so it hasn't been designed yet, but I think the vision in terms of the new one, the current one is like this self-directed, self-paced thing where you go through different learning about yourself and kind of like understanding the connection between goals and mindset and all that. So it's kind of just like a amalgamation of all the things we've been talking about. But the one I want to design, I want it to be a lot more integrated and a little more bold around, because they're doing public charter schools. They had to kind of like play a game. And I'm like, I'm not going to have to play that game, because I don't have the public, like we can't say this or we can't say that. And so we're going to go like really deep on a lot of the, mindfulness, like teaching kids how to meditate. But the core, the vision really is teaching kids. And this is my message that I'd like to teach everybody that I ever work with is, you can trust yourself, like really, really trust yourself with a capital S. And that is something that we've never been taught to do. So this curriculum is going to be about like trusting your intuition, trusting yourself. And when people are disagreeing with you, like always go within and ask like, is this me or is this them? And like, just get clear. So I feel like that right there is going to change the whole entire next generation of how these kids are operating. Cause they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to operate on my internal compass and not the external compass. Right.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yes, I think that that's wonderful. I think that that's so empowering, and it allows us as individuals, all unique in this life experience, to take our power back.
Yes.
It's not, awful to ask for help, but when you're asking how to do something, when to do something, you leave it up to someone else to decide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so many of us like go through life as just a victim of circumstances. And we have no idea that we're actually the ones that get to create our own reality. And we get to choose who we are and how we show up in the world. And it's not something that's dictated to us by our surroundings, but it's the other way around.
So true. And I feel like that has been my biggest learning. I started doing work with Aaron Abke. I think we talked about that last time, Dan.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And he's like really big on, you are the creator. And so I've been with him now I've done his like advanced classes now for a year, and it's completely changed my life.
Wow.
A Course in Miracles. I would highly recommend the Aaron Abke community, the 4DU. It's like $200 a month. And then after 6 months, it's $22 a month. So it's like super reasonable. And there's tons of great content. And then every Sunday he does a 2-hour live talk. But anyway, he's really big on like, you are the creator. And so I would say that's my biggest learning in the last several years, is that every single experience you're having, you're creating through your thoughts, your energy. And, like, again, my example of, I want to quit the bank. I didn't understand it all back then. And it was like immediately. And every time I've done this, it's like things just start coming. So, you've heard this before, but you're fine tuning the radio. And so when you are clear within yourself, then it's just like the good and the bad, the manifestations, right? So you're constantly manifesting. We think it's just like the good, like, oh, we got our Rolls Royce. It's like, no, but you're manifesting all day, like the negative phone call, the this, the that. Those are all things you've created. So once you understand you're the creator and you're in charge, and honestly, your divine child is the person you should be creating. Once you give them the keys, then like you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're able to look at life as this, it's a feedback loop. It's
absolutely
instantaneously giving you either something good, something bad. Again, I don't love those labels, but either in resonance or not resonance. Like if a phone call throws you off, that something's your teacher, like someone saying one line sentence, that's an epiphany. Like, yes, it's a two-way street. Like this is the co-creation of it. Like imagine that if we learned that.
Right? Yeah, it's taken me 10 years. Yeah.
Is there an age limit
here? Exactly.
Yeah, it's taken me 10 years to like figure this out. After like once I started to hear about it and kind of understand that this is a path you can take, and kind of that's the intention that I wanted to grow. Like I had to spend 10 years unlearning all the crap that they stuffed into my head when I was in school, so that I can finally actually embrace the truth of what's going on all around us. And
absolutely.
I think if for kids who could start their life with this kind of teaching and these discussions, like it's amazing, like the exponential growth that's possible.
And what a beautiful world it would cultivate, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, it's so exciting. Oh, Dave.
Well, and as you're speaking, I'll just make this really brief. As you're speaking, I'm like, I love it when anybody compliments Aaron, he's always like, thank you for that reflection. Basically saying like, I'm not going to let my ego take credit for this. So as you were talking, I'm like, I'm not even doing this. I'm not the doer. Like, this is literally God, the universe is basically saying like, okay, you're doing this. This is how, you're asking, your higher self is getting connected. So now we're going to give you exactly what you need to do. So as you're talking, I'm like, I guess this is my mission. So the my is not really my, it's, it's something much bigger than that. So anyway, thank you.
Oh, no, that's beautiful.
There's amazing work being done through you right now.
Thank you. That's a great way to put it.
The world's better because of it. Oh man, this has been great. I really enjoyed this. I think the listeners are going to really enjoy this. Where can people find you if they want to reach out, or what? Yeah, I know there's a lot of options.
Yeah. So davidkrichards.com, and that will have like, if you want to open your own school or learn more about that, it's on there. If you want to do the Wise Warrior, it's on there. If you want to do individual coaching. So everything's on davidkrichards.com. It's the easiest way to find me. And then I always, on the podcast, I always say, feel free to email me at david@davidkrichards.com, because if you're not, probably not going to be shocked by this, but I love talking to people and just getting into conversations. And I feel like, again, I'm not doing it. So anytime I get a phone call or someone reaches out to me, I'm like, oh, okay, that was supposed to happen. So let's just do it. And so I love just being like, great, let's get on the phone and talk for 20 minutes and see where this goes. So feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. Such a great conversation.
It was.